Huaning, I hope you're enjoying the festival. My name is Grace Wang Lynch, and I'm happy to introduce the next reader for Kòo-sū, a Taiwanese storytelling experience. I'm honored to introduce to you Chia-Chia Lin, the author of The Unpassing, which is the winner of the prestigious Clark Fiction Prize. She is a graduate of Harvard and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed your novel and found it super interesting that the family in the novel is actually Taiwanese American, but they live in Alaska, which is kind of unexpected. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that setting came about.
I'm sure. When I first started writing this novel, I actually grew up in Pennsylvania, and that's where I was setting it. And I started feeling really restricted, both by my own, personal history, but also because when you start writing too closely to yourself, I think it can feel very fraught in ways.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can be good or bad, right? It gives you a lot of material, but it also maybe prevents you from pursuing paths that you would otherwise take if you were perfectly free and had a totally blank slate. And so I ended up sort of just as an experiment, moving it to sort of the outskirts of Anchorage, where I worked for a summer. And so it's a place that I still know like fairly well, but I definitely didn't grow up there. And that's when the novel sort of started taking on, I think, more energy and more life for me. And I just kind of
Mm.
went with it from there.
Yeah, I think this is a good time for us to hear you read a passage from your novel.
Okay, great. So for most of the book, the narrator is a 10-year-old boy, but I'm actually going to read an excerpt that's very close to the end, in which he's an adult. And he's still sort of searching throughout this entire book. He's just kind of searching, I think, not just for a sense of belonging, but also for ease. And I'm going to read an excerpt that begins with his return to Taiwan, where he visits his aunt. I went to Taiwan trying to find the village that lived in my memory of my mother's memory. Those rocks, those cliffs, those hunched old women scraping limpets and mussels at low tide. I slept on my aunt's floor. We walked the shore often. Ropes of seaweed covered what little sand there was and housed thousands of jumping bugs. They made the seaweed tremble. My aunt didn't look like my mother at all. There was none of my mother's smallness, quickness, or nervousness. My aunt had large, muscular arms and a thick blanket of straight black hair that looked like it belonged to someone half her age. Her breakfast spreads intimidated me. She brought out ramekins of salted, shredded fish, platters of deep-fried silver pomfret or yellow croaker, crab legs, and broths made by simmering small oysters and clams in water. Sometimes she served the broth in big upturned crab shells. She showed me how to take a chopstick and detach the yellow and gray organs from the shell, mixing them into the soup for flavor. When I tilted the shell like a bowl and drank, she nodded. That's right, my aunt said. Keep at it. She had no children. Her gaze on me was hungry, and she broke it only to suck an oyster or clamshell clean and add it to the pile on the table. They clicked like poker chips. Week after week of eating like that, shellfish and fish at every meal and little else, my lips grew fat and the skin on my face flamed and thickened. Welts appeared on my arms and legs. And why are you still here? People asked. How long are you staying? On the crooked street outside my aunt's house, a little girl fed a dog with teeth hanging to the ground. When she saw me, she buried her face in the dog's matted neck and laughed. Wana, she whispered, a phrase reserved for white Westerners, halfway between foreigner and barbarian. I'd thought I might live there. I had imagined the village as a home I couldn't visualize, but that my body would recall. Some smells, fish-heavy trash, reused cooking oil, the damp remains of a typhoon, were like buried memories. I luxuriated in the humidity, the temperate breeze, but the allergies, the language, the sidelong glances. It was a kind of violence, what my father had done. He had brought us to a place we didn't belong and taken us from a place we did. Now we yearned for all places and found peace in none. The year she died, my mother asked me to cut her hair. In her studio in Seattle, she showed me the scissors she used for regular household tasks. She held them by the blades. "Help me," she said. "Just a trim in the back." "There's a salon down the street," I said. "It's a 5-minute walk." "They want $30 from me," she said. "You need hair cutting scissors to cut hair," I said. "What's the difference?" she said. "There's a difference," I said. For weeks, my mother had been asking me for a haircut. My reluctance had to do with her hair itself. It was getting sparse. Her part had widened, exposing a distinct strip of scalp, and near her forehead there was an especially disturbing bare patch. It shone. When I glimpsed that patch full on, it felt like I'd seen something I shouldn't have. I spread out a layer of overlapping newspapers in the kitchen and lowered a chair onto the center. My mother was prim as she settled herself on it and perched her hands on her knees. But when I did nothing, she grunted in exasperation. "Just cut straight across," she said, and made a short chopping motion behind her head. I pinched a thin section of her hair between my fingers and pulled it flat. It was variegated gray. The white strands were especially wayward. As an experiment, I cut off the smallest length I could, maybe a 1/4 centimeter, and a sprinkling of hair dust fell from my fingertips. My mother twisted her head back and examined the newspapered floor. "Don't be a coward," she said. "Turn around," I said. "That's not going to do it," she said. "I want it off my neck." "Get someone else to do it," I muttered as I made the next cut. But I knew she didn't have anyone else. Her friends had not lasted, and her children had scattered. "Your mood is bad," she said. She used the phrase "xinjing," which broken down into its 2 words meant situation of the heart. I stopped cutting. "This is how I am." "I know it," she said. I couldn't see her face, but her voice had dropped. Did she mean that she knew, even knew it well, this enduring strain of unrest? Later, I let myself into her cramped studio with a bag of groceries. The lights were off, though the day was on the wane. A feeble glow entered from the kitchen windows. From the door, I could see my mother's figure in the armchair by her bed. Both of her feet were pressed into the carpet. She was making a rhythmic movement, raising one hand above her head and flicking her wrist. I stepped closer to turn on the lights, but stopped. Her fingers, pinched together, tossed something to the carpet. While I watched, she repeated the gesture 6 or 7 more times with an air of absent-mindedness. She stared straight at the old television, which was off. What other permutations of her life would have led her to this point, this plucking of the hair, strand by strand? She was making herself bald, and I wasn't sure she realized. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Chia-Chia. I was wondering, before we go, if you can tell people where they can follow you online, if you have a website or social media.
Yeah, sure. When anything's happening right now, nothing much is happening during the pandemic. But when there is, I usually keep my website up to date, and it's www.chiachialin.com. And I occasionally, very occasionally, post on Instagram as Slippy, Slippie.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Chia-Chia. I know you're very busy, and we will be back throughout the festival with more Taiwanese American writers and Kòo-sū, a Taiwanese storytelling experience. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Grace, and thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.